It's time for the main event. Here comes the breakdown. Act 1, the setup.
Depending on what version you have, our story begins with Charles Dickens giving my cat is breaking stuff in the kitchen. He's freaking out because we have a stray cat that just lives out in the yard. And so when that cat comes by, he just flips his shit and runs around looking out the windows at him.
How does that cat have so much energy still? Like,
I don't know. He's 13. And you couldn't tell other than he sleeps for like 24 hours a day or
but that's
22
cat,
hours a day.
Yeah, the first time I ever met that cat was when it was a baby, and it's exactly the same as it was back then. Still the same amount of energy, still ripping shit up, breaking things.
He's running around right now. All right, anyway. Depending on what version you have, our story begins with Charles Dickens giving a live reading of his story, A Christmas Carol, to a live audience somewhere in Boston, 1867. This would have been 3 years before he died at the age of 58, but they make him look 70 since life was rough back in those days. Our wholesome portrait of a post-Civil War America starts with adults-only audience enjoying a celebrated British author reading a story intended for children that is weirdly accompanied by some horribly fake-looking CGI mice. Seriously, Birdemic had better effects in this thing. It's true. Did they look awful? I don't know why they didn't just make them live action. Maybe that was, or I'm not. I mean, yeah, they could have done that. Like, you can't find trained mice, or just made them cartoon. Like, I think it would have
leave them
fit
cartoon.
better.
I think that would have been better.
In fact, they transitioned them from cartoon to CGI in the later part, and at the end of it, it's so bizarre.
Yeah, I don't know, man. Weird choice, and like, it's not like good CGI didn't exist in 2001. So
yeah, I mean, I know that you could tell this was a budget. I didn't realize this had a theatrical release. I thought it was just some like straight to Hallmark kids special that aired.
It feels like that, but I think most of the money went to the animation and probably Kate Winslet and Nick Cage. Yeah.
It does say starring Nick Cage in the credits.
It does.
Got that star power for a role you would never even know was him unless somebody told you. Yeah. Some dainty Boston maiden screams in terror at an obviously fake mouse, so I guess Dickens decided to add mice to his live reading because these little bastards are basically the stars of the film. We cut to Cartoon World, where we see the CGI mouse turn into a drawing, and we're escorted to freezing cold London in the 1840s. Cut to Ebenezer Scrooge calling in unpaid debts at a bank. Then to Alms Hospital for the Poor, where we see a bunch of poor, sick kids whimsically playing with a filthy street mouse. So we know they're definitely going to die. Ever heard of bubonic plague? How about hantavirus? Anything? People should not have been associating with rodents back then. We see Scrooge ignoring homeless people begging in the streets on his way to meet Old Joe, who has somehow managed to become fat in 1840s poverty-stricken England. So you know he's up to some shady business.
He's just got bad genetics, dude. Leave him alone.
Scrooge makes fun of Old Joe pretending he can read. But Old Joe says he'll get some book-learning nerd to translate the chicken scratch, and we find out these are debts people owe Scrooge's business, which I think is just, he's just a moneylender. I don't know if he does anything except
I think so, yeah. He owns their debts. So
yeah, that's it.
Like,
he buys
like collections in 1840s version of collections.
We see Joe and the Fuzz rounding up people who are delinquent in their debts and toss them in prison on Christmas Eve. That'll solve it. Worked out great. Debtors' prisons. Scrooge complains about the homeless after pushing an old blind beggar out of his way and says his old dead associate Marley would say the vermin on the streets must be swept away. Speaking of vermin, this crotchety old bastard who seems to hate every living soul is overjoyed when he walks into his office without even saying hello to his assistant, Bob Cratchit, to find a mouse on his desk. For some reason, he loves these mice.
Yeah. Which is weird because like he hates everything, but he loves this mouse.
It's out of character. It's bizarre.
Yeah.
I know what you're thinking. This mouse really gets around. But no, this is a different mouse than the one eating crumbs out of a dirty shoe trying to make sure those kids don't see next Christmas. He gives the mouse a big chunk of cheese while looking at Cratchit like he's afraid he'll steal it. It's the mouse's cheese. You already had yours last week.
Paws off. Yeah, you had your cheese.
Feed him out of his hand.
Give me that, you.
We cut to Kate Winslet's character, Belle, excitedly discharging a boy named Tiny Tim out of the hospital in time for Christmas. Then the nurse in charge of making sure these kids live or die reveals a mouse in her hands. So again, safe to say all these kids are as good as dead. It's Victorian England. Everything will just kill you. Like they just... If you ever watch, there's like specials just about how like poisonous Victorian houses were. Just fucking lead in the wallpaper for some reason because it made a nice green color.
But it tasted good. So.
Tasted real good.
The rat crawls all over the little boy while he giggles. Then a doctor says to make sure the boy stays warm or else he'll get his cough back. Should be easy enough. Just don't take the recently discharged from the hospital little boy on crutches out caroling in the freezing snow.
Maybe keep him in the house.
Belle and the doctor worry that they might be shut down since they have no money to pay bills, and on cue, the cops bust in and throw the doctor in jail since Scrooge has taken over ownership of their hospital debts. Meanwhile, old Joe steals some money and frightens the children while that stupid mouse gesticulates at him like Harpo Marx. Boy, these mice don't get annoying. I hope you like them.
They're over every shot for some reason.
Belle tearfully writes a letter to Ebenezer Scrooge, which reveals that she once knew him, and they were close, but before she could finish, we cut to Bob Cratchit warming himself like a dirty freeloader by a fire. Belle enters and asks about Marley, while a mouse crawls all over her, and another one watches on from the corner. What the hell's going on? Why are we focused on these mice rather than, A Christmas Carol? That's the story we're trying to watch. Again, it has to be something for kids to watch because
I guess
there's nothing in this movie that kids will enjoy, even the mice.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering if they were just like, there's no joy in this thing at all. We got to put something in there to make people happy. Okay, they just wanted it to be more for kids, and it was like the story was obviously made more adult and more bleak.
Yeah, it's a story. It's for adults. It's for middle-aged adults. Teaching people to mend their ways. Cratchit agrees to deliver her letter to Scrooge, and for some reason we spend 2 minutes watching her mouse friend run along around Scrooge's office while the other mouse watches on. Belle assures Dr. Lambert that Scrooge will remember her and will help them since they shared so much, but Lambert says he's a cold-hearted bastard now. Next, we see Scrooge push some carolers out of his way and then say humbug to his nephew, who seems to be the only person who gives a damn that Ebenezer's alive. He calls his nephew an unwanted relative after he asks Scrooge to have dinner with his family and slams the door in his face since the loser idiot got married before he was established.
It's a recurring theme in this. Yeah. You can't get married before you're rich, apparently.
Right. Yeah, according to Scrooge, yeah. Next, Scrooge dumps a bucket of water directly on Tiny Tim since he and the other carolers disturbed Scrooge yelling at Mr. Cratchit, which I think is attempted murder back then. I mean, it's already freezing out and he just throws water. It was probably from his chamber pot.
It really paints that mouse crawling around in it in a different light.
Meanwhile, Belle's mouse almost drowns in a bucket of water while trying to get Belle's letter off the floor, but is saved by Scrooge's mouse. Like these mice have a relationship too that develops.
Yeah. It's like a weird mirror. So like one of the mice is like Scrooge and the other mouse is like her, and the crotchety mouse slowly becomes more gentle as we go along as well. Why?
Yeah, I don't know why you needed that. Scrooge picks up his mouse and decides to have a little time with it back in the office. We watch the two mice squeak at each other and play charades for a bit while Belle's mouse tries to get the letter to Scrooge. Ebenezer bitches about having to pay Cratchit for sitting on his ass doing nothing on Christmas, tells him to come back extra early the day after Christmas to make up for lost time, and gets irrationally angry when Cratchit almost wishes him a Merry Christmas. Scrooge spots the two mice carrying Belle's letter like it's a stretcher and calls Cratchit a good-for-nothing since he left a letter on the floor since a mouse is tidier than him. He stashes the letter in his shirt pocket, and then everything goes psychedelic. Clock starts spinning wildly, pages of books start flipping on their own, candles shoot flames. But when it ends, Scrooge thinks nothing of it and decides to head home. So I guess that was normal? Maybe he frequents the opium dens?
He's having an acid flashback.
Whoa, I should stop eating the lead paint on the wall.
Isn't it funny how everything that's ghost related is always Victorian? I always see ghosts with Victorian dress. And that's also coincidentally when ghost craze kind of became a thing.
Yeah.
It's a bunch of bored Victorians. It's just a weird. I'm sure that's not related to anything. Suddenly,
this was probably the house is settling in the freezing cold, and they were like, "It must be my uncle."
Yeah. They're all dying of fever delirium.
Yeah.
Suddenly, a ghost with the voice of Nicolas Cage floats through the window, which would be scary enough, but this one has chains around him and is moaning like, well, a ghost. The ghost turns out to be Scrooge's old business partner, Marley, who warns Ebenezer that if he continues the way he is, he'll end up like him, wearing the chains of his ignorance for eternity. Scrooge argues that Jacob Marley lived his life with purpose and is a single-minded businessman, but Marley tells him he wasted his days hoarding money and only thinking about himself. While all this is going on, we're focused entirely on those goddamn mice crawling into shirt pockets since they're scared.
Goddamn mice, dude. Seriously. We get it. They're there.
Marley says he wishes he could help, but it's too late for him, but not for Ebenezer. He then warns his old business partner that he'll be haunted by 3 spirits, to which Ebenezer says he's a busy man, so 3 is going to eat up a lot of his time. It's a weird reaction.
I don't have time for 3. Can we do them all at once?
Yeah, can I? They don't even have an appointment.
It's nighttime. I want to get some rest.
Jacob tells Scrooge to grow, blossom, and share before he ends up just like him. But after watching his dead friend be pulled out of a window by a gaggle of dementors wrapped in chains, he slams the window and says he has no time for foolish delusions.
Again, it's like,
by Jove, I'm
this is a
hallucinating.
normal thing for him. Constantly tripping.
He gets a knock on the door from some dudes who just let themselves in the middle of the night. It's already nighttime. And they ask for donations to help the poor. Scrooge angrily escorts them outside and asks why the poor don't just get jobs or something. You know, pull themselves up by their bootstraps.
Reminded me
Borrow
of
money from
American
their parents.
Psycho. Why don't you get a job, Al?
The men say that many of the poor would rather die than go to a workhouse, so Scrooge says, let them die, make themselves useful by reducing the surplus population. And then they leave, and then we see one of the mice jump out the window onto Scrooge's hat and then crawl into his pocket, so he's still got both mice with him.
It's very important.
Yeah, you have to follow those mice.
It's like this whole thing is like 77 minutes, and I swear that 35 of it is these goddamn mice doing stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right.
Take an edit that removes all the mice and see what happens.
It'd be 25 minutes long.
Act 2, The Conflict.
Bob Cratchit happily walks home after a busy day of helping an evil man exploit and imprison the poor, where we see that Tiny Tim is actually his kid. Guess he didn't think to look when Scrooge was chucking water at the Christmas carolers, since he does that kind of stuff all the time. Like, didn't even look. Didn't hear his own son outside. Tim has caught his death of cold, but he says they have some sugar cookies or something, so it'll be the best Christmas ever. Belle tries to comfort the dying kids in the bankrupt hospital overrun by rodents while cursing Ebenezer for locking up the only doctor who can help these poor children. Scrooge once again sees Marley in the form of a door knocker who tells him to mend your ways. Wait, mend your ways. But again, this doesn't really faze him all that much. He just kind of keeps going about his business, you know. Old Joe sneaks up on him, and Scrooge tells him to get the job done while we watch this stupid mice squeak and gesticulate for an unnecessary amount of time. Again. It's like, we're just watching two characters have a conversation, and we cut to the mice, like, just doing things for fucking 10 minutes, feels like, in his pocket. He doesn't feel that? We see Scrooge in his cold, empty home where he says he and Marley ran an honest business. He's like talking to himself. And it's not his fault that the world is cruel. That felt like it was an ADR like add-on because it's like, I don't know. He's like walking up the steps. We don't see his mouth moving or anything. And that line comes over the top of that. Scrooge is overjoyed to see the mouse from his office has followed him home and gives him the dinner he was eating while the other mouse puts pulls Belle's letter from his jacket pocket. He slumps in his bed for a good night's rest with the flea-covered vermin, but falls asleep before he gets a chance to read the letter while the other mouse crawls in and out of a bowl of porridge. I can't imagine why there's so much sickness going around the city. How are all these kids so sick? Can't imagine. Suddenly, a ghost with a flame for a head shows up in his room, and one of those, he's like holding one of those cheerleader megaphone things or something. I think it was like the thing that you put the candle out with. Is like, so she like puts it on
a snuffer
before she disappears. Yeah,
yeah, because she's a flame. So
it
yeah,
looked like one of those megaphone thingies.
Yeah.
She says she's the ghost of Christmas past, and he says he'd rather just go back to bed than hang out with the spirit. You know, that's how I'd react if a ghost with a flame for a head showed up in my room.
Turn the light out. Trying to sleep.
He falls asleep again, and then the ghost reappears next to the bed as an like she turns into an old lady or something. Like she's constantly like transforming from young to old. And he just screams bloody murder when he sees her pop up. It's like the only real reaction of the whole movie for him. Oh, and of course, so do the mice. They also scream because they're integral to every moment in this film. They all float out the window, except for one mouse for some reason, to the English countryside in Ebenezer's past. We see Scrooge as a boy, where we see his parents have left him at his boarding school on Christmas. Then a few years later, where we see his sister Fran came to take him home, and he's introduced to Fran's friend, Belle. Yeah, the mouse with the nurse with the mouse fetish. So he knew her from when they were young and was actually engaged to her, as we find out. Belle was less rat-infested back when she knew Scrooge, so they quickly fall in love. We see Ebenezer's dad being a real prick to him, mirroring the way Scrooge has treated people so far in the film. His dad says they'll soon discover if he's any use to the family, since he's about to become a businessman and has to leave for London the next day to go work at Fizzywigs. Fizzywigs.
Miss Frizzle's Magic School Bus.
Which, like, what was the business that Fizzywig had? It was like a
Fezziwig. It looked like same thing, money lending or something.
Same thing, yeah. Anyways. Remember that all of these snapshots are of his Christmases. So he's had some good times throughout the years. We cut to a few years later where Ebenezer woos Belle, even though she's poor and her dad was a drunk carriage driver or whatever. We watch him dance the night away, much to the mouse in his pocket's delight. And the ghost of Christmas Past says Scrooge's old boss didn't have to throw a party, but he did in order to make the lives of his workers better. Scrooge realizes the happiness his old boss Fizzy Wig, brought them every day was worth a fortune. So he's starting to see like, oh, maybe I should do that, or maybe I should try at all to make things better for my workers. Belle tells Ebenezer money isn't everything, since she has none, but she has him. And she's like, I would rather sit around dreaming of you, you crotchety scumbag. He seemed like an asshole back then too. It doesn't seem like after this is over that Scrooge is going to be a better person. Maybe for like a week, because he seems like he was always a piece of shit. We see Ebenezer inheriting his dad's business after he died, which is also fun to think of. That happening on Christmas. Because these are all supposed to be snapshots of Christmas past. Yeah. So he got the will read to him on Christmas.
My great grandpa died on Christmas.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, when I was like 1, I think. 1 or 2.
If you go back Christmas past, you'll see yourself.
I'll get to relive that cherished memory in my family.
We also see that his dad left Fran, his sister, absolutely nothing since her father never approved of her marriage, which I guess makes the whole thing with Belle make more sense. Of like, would my dad have approved of you and I being together? You're poor and I'm rich, and you'll end up inheriting half of this, or you'll end up taking half of this, or you'll end up with all of it if I die. So let's just sign this contract so you get nothing. Mm-hmm. We also find out that his sister died giving birth to Fred, the nephew we met earlier. Man, London in the 1800s. Yeah. Next, we cut to Scrooge proposing to Belle with a business contract. Basically an 1840s prenuptial agreement of some sort. And she's not a big fan, since she was hoping for him to get down on one knee or something less scummy. And Belle tells him she doesn't like the man he's become. She breaks up with him since she's afraid he'll regret being with a poor girl, and she tearfully says goodbye while older Scrooge yells at his younger self to stop her from leaving, but his younger self is just as wooden and boring as every frame of this film. Scrooge begs the ghost not to torment him any longer, and she takes him home while he bitches about making the choices he did for good reasons. Next, we see the mouse in his pocket reading Belle's letter. Mice are really good readers, everybody knows that. In the letter, Belle begs him to help her since they were once in love, but the dirty mice in his bed are interrupted by the next ghost. So they can finish reading. Scrooge wakes up to find a 9-foot-tall dude who looks like Paul Bunyan in a robe standing in his living room. I'm guessing there's nothing under that robe based on the way that he talks to Ebenezer. Come in and know me better. Scrooge is pissed that the ghost filled his house with food and made it look less drab and awful for a change. But the ghost says he's there to teach him the joy that comes from sharing. He takes off his robe, slips it to the ground, and asks if he'd like to meet his friend, Dumbledore. No, wait. This is the ghost of Christmas Present, who says he has so much to show him and to touch my robe. That's how they fly together. It's like, the robe is...
Yeah, it's like a Zelda CDI character.
It's so covered in magic that he floats afterwards.
Turns into an acid trip. Yeah.
Yeah. They fly off into a technicolored fever dream while we watch the mice for like half of the shots. Seriously, was it just cheaper to animate these damn mice or what? Scrooge, the mice, and the ghost fly over some nightmare fuel drawn with crayons, for a while as the ghost makes people happy by pouring magic dust out of a gourd of some sort on them. Eventually, Scrooge takes over, pouring happy glitter on everyone, and I guess he realizes how good it feels to make other people happy. This ghost of a Christmas present must be really popular at orgies.
Oh my God.
Anyways, after 40 minutes of that crap, the ghost shows Ebenezer the consequences of his actions and how people actually feel about him. First, we see his nephew playing a guessing game, and when Fred describes a monster, someone guesses it's Uncle Scrooge. Fred says his uncle is a mean old so-and-so, but he's the only family he's got, so he'll never stop trying to include him in his life. They all say Scrooge is a tight-fisted scumbag who will take his money to the grave, and Scrooge is shocked that people think that way about him, even though every second of this film he's shown himself to be exactly that. He complains that he keeps to himself for just this reason, since people can't understand him because he doesn't squander his money on useless crap like other people and such. Next, we see old Joe taking poor people's belongings on Christmas to pay the debts owed to Scrooge. And Ebenezer says the ghost doesn't understand since he's not a businessman. Are you even in business? Fucking old Joe's laugh. We see the Cratchits making the most of their fun little poverty Christmas, while Tiny Tim breathes what will probably be his last good breaths of air. Tim's dad says, "Cough it up, Tim. It might be a gold watch," as his son open-mouth coughs all over the dinner table they're about to eat at. Bob salutes his family one by one and gives thanks to Ebenezer Scrooge for putting food on the table. His son just coughed all over, and his family is disgusted he even used Scrooge's name since he gave Tiny Tim pneumonia, which is basically a death sentence. Cratchit defends Scrooge, saying he's kept him employed for 14 years, and it's not a big deal that he killed his child.
Trickle-down economics. Cheer.
Trickle-down
economics. I have to explain this again.
That's the thing. That's what Scrooge someday. Yelled as he was dumping the water on him.
Tiny Tim says, "Let our love eat away at his unjust soul." Because that's how kids talked back then. Now Tim would say, "On God, that sus bougie old head ain't living rent-free in our head as the main character, for real, for real." Scrooge begs to know if the poor kid he's 100% responsible for giving pneumonia will live, and the ghost says, "What's it to you? Let him die and decrease the surplus population." That's cold, man.
That's out of pocket.
I love that line. That's out of pocket. Scrooge wants to know what will happen in the future, but the ghost says he only knows the present and disappears.
Yeah, I think Scrooge is just suffering from ergot poisoning. Just hallucinating all this shit.
Yeah, that would explain a lot.
He would eat moldy bread. Wouldn't go buy some new stuff. He just eat what he's got, even if it's moldy and gross.
Yeah. Turns out the mice aren't actually there. Both he and Belle are just tripping because of the fucking horrible conditions of everything.
Act 3, The Resolution.
We see a black hand appear from some clouds, and it grabs Scrooge's hand. The Grim Reaper-looking ghost of Christmas future shows the Cratchit family crying at the dinner table about Tiny Tim's death. They all break down, remembering how much he loved Christmas, and Scrooge is devastated. And so are the mice in his pocket because, you know, they're ever constant, ever present, even in Scrooge's worst nightmares. Next, Scrooge watches as people around London celebrate a happier and more just world. Then to Scrooge's associates talking about how Scrooge was found after being dead for 3 days, and it's a good thing it was cold, or he'd have stunk to high heaven. They all laugh about no one caring that Scrooge died since there wasn't a soul left who gave a damn about him, to the point that no one even checked to see if he was alive after being missing for 3 days. Scrooge sees his lifeless body under a sheet in his bed while his associates haggle over his belongings and say he was too selfish to even share a disease if he had one.
Oh, that's a good line.
Yeah.
Yeah. He sees the only one who cared that he died was Belle, who is interrupted from her grieving by Dr. Lambert, who is overjoyed that Scrooge can no longer bleed them dry. Scrooge begs to know if the future can be changed, or is he past all hope? Then suddenly he is wrapped in change like Marley, and Nicolas Cage temporarily rejoins the film for 20 seconds. Marley tells him he has no time to waste, breaks his chain, and Scrooge wakes up back in his bed in the present. He's overjoyed to be alive and immediately embraces his mice friends who gave him the plague, and he dies a week later. The end. No, wait. He celebrates being alive by yelling out the window to a boy making a snowman in the middle of the street since cars didn't exist yet. The boy says it's Christmas Day, and Scrooge says it all must have been just a bad dream, so he's stoked he can go back to being a scumbag. Suddenly, he sees the ghost chain around his waist in the mirror and decides, nah, better try to be somewhat decent person. I guess. That's what that means.
I thought he's like immediately rude to that little kid. After he learned nothing. I'm just telling you, he's going back to being a piece of shit.
I'm sure he'll change. He yells at the boy again to buy a goose and to deliver it to Bob Cratchit while tossing money down to him. I know how to mend my ways. You there, dissolute child, take my money and run an errand for me since you obviously have nothing better to do on Christmas. Sure, I could do it myself, but why not the servant class do it for me?
He's trying.
He's trying. Baby steps.
Baby steps.
Anyways, the kid steals his money and takes off. Wait, no, this is a Dickens story. So the kid does exactly as he's asked and tells him to have a happy Christmas. Scrooge practices saying Merry Christmas in the mirror like a robot learning how to blend in with the humans. Or like one of the characters from The Old Way. Wah, wah, Merry Christmas. The mice drag the letter over to the edge of the bed, and Scrooge finally reads it. He promises not to let Belle down, then gives the mice a cake and a block of cheese. He just leaves 2 filthy street rats to make a huge mess on his bed while he's away.
Just imagine just little droplets of shit all over the bed. All the food is strewn all over the place. Cake is melting all over the sheets. So wholesome.
Outside, he tells everyone on the street Merry Christmas, buys some oranges that he gives to a couple of kids some guy has slung in a sack over his shoulder since he presumably just stole them to eat for Christmas, since poverty is so horribly rampant.
What the hell was that?
Just imagine him eating those children.
They're his own kids. He was taking them to market to sell.
I'll get 5 shillings for these.
He spots the first 2 ghosts who slip him some acid for a second before returning to normal and cries at the sound of some Christmas carolers singing. He sees a vision of old Joe and his goons laughing about taking people's stuff on Christmas, so he decides to go make things right. Suddenly we cut to Belle singing a song about what could have been if Scrooge hadn't turned out to be a money-grubbing scumbag. During the song, we see Belle cry in the empty hospital while Scrooge fires old Joe and gives the money he got from him to the old beggar he pushed out of the way earlier. Scrooge walks home that night and Belle is waiting for him outside his front door. She yells at him for having his men come and take all of the items from the hospital, and he says he's sorry he was too late. Wait, what happened to the kids?
Yeah, they were in the sack.
Were they the ones in the sack? Or did old Joe eat them? I mean, it would explain why he's so fat.
He's been eating children.
I think I mean, that happened to my wife's great-great-grandfather. Somebody on her. No, he was sold into indentured servitude from England and ended up going over to Canada as a child because you could just sell your kids back then if you didn't have enough money. So that's what
you could still do that now.
There aren't official channels to do it now.
You couldn't just put them out on the fucking steps now, but you could back then. Like, I feel like there was a Great Depression picture of somebody like trying to sell their kids on the stoop.
Yeah.
Good times. We might be returning to those times.
Scrooge says he'd do anything to change the terrible things he's done, and he laments that he has so much money and a good profitable business, but he'd be rid of it all if he could change things. He says he wasted his life, and she says he can still change things by helping people. He says he will do everything he can, and we cut to Dr. Lambert getting out of jail. Bob Cratchit arrives at the office late, and Scrooge pretends to be mad at him while two mice sit on his shoulder like that's a normal thing people do. Then Scrooge...
you know you have two mice on your shoulder.
Don't mind them.
These are my only friends.
Listen here, governor. Then Scrooge quadruples his salary and gives him his own office while saying, "Happy Christmas, Bob."
I just love the way, "Happy Christmas, Bob." So weird.
Never called him Bob before.
No.
Or said Happy Christmas.
He gives Cratchit Marley's old office and promises to help his family in every way he can. We hear Dickens narrating like at the beginning of the film while saying that Scrooge was better than his word. He says Ebenezer kept Christmas in his heart from then on, and we see Tiny Tim dancing in the street with Belle. Dickens says Scrooge was like a second father to Tim, and we cut back to non-cartoon world where the cartoon mice turn back into creepy CGI monstrosities. Jesus, I wouldn't go that far, but yeah, they are pretty awful looking. Dickens says that's the story of A Christmas Carol, although with 5,000% more mice this time around. The crowd erupts in applause, and the creepy mice give each other a little kiss. The end.